that track, and it really speaks to the kind of unity that we want to have in our music scene. So we are now live on Facebook, so I think we'll just go ahead and get started. I'm Karen Reece. I'm the president of Urban Community Arts Network, and we are bringing you this virtual teach-in tonight on racial equity in Madison music. Just a couple of nuts and bolts for how we'll do things tonight. If you are tuning in on Zoom, we are in webinar mode, so you won't be able to turn on your mic or your camera, but if you have a question for us or want to talk to each other, you can use either the Q&A button or you can use the chat screen. So at any time, if you want to ask a question, pop that in and we'll answer your questions. If you're on Facebook, if you're watching on the UCAN page, you can type your questions into the comments section, and we have someone monitoring that. So we'll get to your questions there too. Here's what we're going to do tonight. A little bit of welcomes and introductions. Then we'll give you a brief presentation about what's going on. And then finally, we'll end with our Q&A, and we'll end up with some next steps and things that you can do to participate. So I'll turn it over to Wendy.
Hi, I just want to say on the technical side, I'm not seeing the live feed yet. So I will be looking for that when we go back to you to do the presentation, Karen. But yeah, I'm not sure. Am I supposed to be seeing it on the UCAN page? Are other people seeing it?
I thought I saw it, but let me go check and see.
Scott, are you seeing the live feed?
Yeah, I am.
On the UCAN page?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, pick the first post.
Okay. I'll get back to that when you start the presentation. But thanks, Karen. Thanks, Rob Dz. Karen, again, like president of Urban Community Arts Network, Rob Dz, Madison hip hop activist, artist, educator. I felt, you know, as sitting with you and Rob Dz in a few meetings a few months back and learning that there was a report that you had worked tirelessly on that recommended 31 basically steps to take to make our music scene and the Madison business community and how it's connected with music more equitable. So you were open to doing a teach-in. I think that this is a great step. I know that you have, you know, you've spoken to Scott, you've done other live stream or virtual events. I think that this is a very generous part of the work that you're doing, which is really offering yourselves to the community to give us insight into what's behind the report, what we're faced with now that there aren't active venues, and how we can use that as opportunities to begin implementing in different ways recommendations that the task force made. So, you know, I have a long history with Madison musicians. I own Coney Island Studios. I feel that I want to be invested in as many ways that I can on just the health and safety and thrivability of the Madison music scene. And I feel grateful and fortunate that you and Rob have begun clearing a path that others can join onto and learn and expand and grow and just make it, you know, just a great scene for everyone. So thank you very much.
Get it.
So I'll look for the feed. Scott, do you want to intro yourself a little bit?
Yeah, my name's Scott Gordon. I'm the editor and publisher at Tone Madison, and we're a website that covers arts and culture and politics in Madison. And I'm excited to be part of this conversation because over the years, we've covered not only the specific report that Karen and Rob both kind of headed up the work on, but we've also covered a lot of the kind of ongoing underlying issues that kind of create the inequities that the report's talking about. So it's interesting how prescient the report is in light of the policy conversations we're having in the city now. And, you know, it's interesting how there seems to be a struggle to get city leaders to act on it in a real way. So I'm really heartened that people still want to talk about this and push that conversation.
Right on. So Karen, do you want to take it away and just give us the overview of the report?
Yeah, I'll pitch it to Rob first.
Okay.
Start us off.
Okay. And I guess to kind of give a little tidbit on the ball rolling. I am a musician based out of Madison. When I first came into the scene, there was a moratorium on hip hop. A lot of venues kind of shut down and didn't really want hip hop in its regard, I guess. So I bring that up to bring up kind of where we're at right now, because it's been a constant struggle to try to get equality, basically. For me personally, it did a lot of things. I mean, like, for example, even having evolved musically, there were steps that I had to make, I felt, in order to be accepted within the mainstream scene. For example, I started off with a DJ, 2 turntables and a microphone. And it seemed like there was negativity surrounding that. And that led to me, deciding, number one, creatively, I want to do something different. But number two, I recognized that a live band element seemed a little bit safer in some regards to certain venues or things like that. Just a bunch of different experiences that really, over the years, have kind of led me to the point of collaborating with Karen and UCAN and figuring out, like, how do we get everyone's voice heard? Fortunately for me, I've always known that I've had to be 2 or 3 steps ahead just to get play. But at the same time, for every one Rob Dz that got ahead, there's at least 10 other Black artists, hip hop artists, that didn't get that chance. And I didn't really feel like that was right, For me, arts and music are a microcosm of society in general, and to see the unequal elements in my genre also led me to think about how things are in society on a whole, which kind of led to the push of fighting for, equality in the scene, to make sure that voices that are overlooked get a chance to be heard and felt. So that's where it started. What at least for me as an artist, what I would like to be able to see is growth in the idea of all voices being heard. So that's kind of where the work with Karen and UCAN really kind of began. And when I say that equal for all, man, I mean, like, whether it's at venues, and I know it's different now because of COVID, the idea of venues, but like even in presentations on a bigger level, just making sure that all voices and all walks of life are included. So that's kind of what led to me really wanting to dig in and get on with this. And I'm thankful that I got a chance to collaborate with Karen on it, because Karen is a beast when it comes to stats, and she is really championed for this and really kind of helped make it make sense. Like the feelings that we as artists have felt, she has, kind of been able to run the numbers so people can really see it. And like I said, my goal is to make sure that we improve the scene for everyone. So, and especially, like I said, it's cool to say everyone, but I specifically do want to make sure that the artists of color, and specifically African-American artists, really get a chance, man. We have relevant stories. We're part of Wisconsin. Wisconsin is one of the worst places for Black folks to live. So obviously we got some stories to tell. So, that's why this work is important. I feel like I've talked a little bit too much, so I will pass it on and we will kind of go from there.
Well, that was great. Thanks, Rob. I'm going to start by just giving a little context to how we're talking about music equity and the music scene in Madison. And it's a little bit different than what we have traditionally. We just kind of talk about music, we talk about entertainment, we talk about the bar scene, but we don't really talk about how that impacts really everything else in our city. So you can see at the center here is our music ecosystem. And so those are the things we traditionally talk about: venues, people who are recording music, parks, people who are playing live music, the promoters, the PR people, the Scots in the world, the people that really keep our music scene alive and well, and of course, all the artists, musicians, and others that are doing the actual work. But what we don't think about is we're then leading to community engagement. You'd be remiss to find any major community function that doesn't have some form of art featured, whether it's a live band playing or in a museum, for example. Community centers are filled with local art, young artists, paintings. Many are including music studios. It's very important there. We all know that education is one place where when the funding gets tight, it's the first thing to go. But having a vibrant music ecosystem means that we have teachers who can go into our schools and to give a different perspective to what's going on, as well as giving a professional development training to other musicians who are in the scene. Governance, we've got our Madison Arts Commission here. We've got our Dane Arts Board in our county. This touches on city planning. That's actually where our Madison Arts Commission is centered in our Karen Wolf, the administrators, is in that planning division. Economic development, of course, musicians are entrepreneurs. They help to bring business to bar owners. They help to bring business to restaurants and improve things there. And then, of course, media who are covering these events. And then it even goes even farther. So sporting events, video game music, what's happening in our overall nightlife, who's coming to Madison, Wisconsin to see a specific local act. Health and well-being. During this whole COVID situation, we've all been running to our virtual platforms to see our favorite musicians play. And musicians did that because they wanted to, because they love to share their art with people, and they know that that's what we needed to keep our mental health in line as we go through this. So as we go through this, just remember all of the different pieces that our music scene touches. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background here. And to do that, I need to define what we're talking about when we talk about hip hop in Madison. So there are three main categories when we talk about hip hop in Madison. On the right-hand side here, first we have college artists. So the UW-Madison has a program called First Wave, and this is one of the first of its kind in the entire country where students can come, get a degree, but essentially study and get a degree in hip hop arts. And artists from First Wave will often get tapped to perform at different kinds of events, government events. They might get tapped to do concerts at the UW. There's a certain level of trust that comes along because the artist is attached to the UW name. So there's trust and there's expectation that this is going to be talent. The next category is our national and regional touring artists. This is just a flyer from Club Liquid. So we have these artists that are brought in from all over to places like Liquid, Majestic, Orpheum to play for us. And there are a decent amount of hip hop artists that have come through here. But these shows are often marketed with a higher ticket price point, and we often see audiences that are full of young, white, college aged people. And we don't often see the marketing to these events get into the hip hop community. When we talk about local hip hop, we're talking about local artists. We're not talking about national, regional, we're not talking about college. We're talking about the people that live and work in the Madison area, the greater Madison area, Dane County, and nearby. The people who are doing this for the love, who are doing this as a side business, maybe full-time, maybe part-time, but they expect to be able to make a living in their hometown. And even if they're not dependent on the income, they expect to be able to build a fan base in their local city. So a little bit about UCAN. We started in the summer of 2010, and we came together for this exact reason that we're talking about tonight. the fact that hip hop artists didn't get a lot of recognition in the Madison music scene. There were a lot of myths and fears about hip hop being violent, that if there was a hip hop show at a venue, there would automatically be a fight or something terrible would happen. And people weren't recognizing all of the wonderful shows that were happening, all of the charity and philanthropy that was coming out, and not to mention all of the talent. So we came together to start the Madison Hip Hop Awards, which ran for 8 years until we hit a snag in securing venues. But we realized that there was so much more that we could do as a nonprofit. And so we formed this nonprofit Urban Community Arts Network. And since then, we've done things like a live summer concert series at the top of State Street, which sadly we're not able to do this summer, but we've done a few events online. And then we also have our Level Up Professional Development series. This involves both a half-day conference where people come and learn about the business aspect of the music industry and get to network and build. And then it also involves our program that provides artist residencies for hip hop artists in our local schools. So we bring in rappers to work with kids. Our first variation was in a climate change unit at Black Hawk Middle School. And so this not only allows kids to see adults of color in an authority role in their classroom. We don't have a lot of Black teachers in Madison. And then it also is an opportunity for the artists to be able to build their resume and understand that there's more than they can do than just get on stage and sell records. Another project that I have in collaboration with Rob and the Madison Public Library is the Media Academy. So Rob developed this concept of sort of a summer camp for kids to come, teenagers primarily, to come to the library and learn how to record, learn how to make beats, learn how to do videography and photography. And the whole program is really driven by the participants. So we have sort of a basic framework that we follow, and then we really just let the kids explore and learn what they want to learn. And at the end of the day, they come out with some pretty amazing products, which you can find both on the Madison Public Library page, and you can find that on the Madison Hip Hop Awards YouTube channel as well. So another thing that we've done as part of UCAN is we've done research. So for years, we battled this stigma of hip hop being violent and hip hop being a threat. Now, hundreds of artists come together, do hundreds of shows per year locally, and report not having any problems. For UCAN, we've been doing shows over the last 10 years. I can count on one hand the number of issues that we've had. So we knew that this was a myth, this wasn't true, but we didn't have the data. And of course, being in a university town, we got to have our data. So we partnered with Randy Stoker, who's a professor at the UW. And we asked this, he had a class of undergrad students who were ready to work on a project. And so they went out and they called for police calls for service for an 8-year period, 2008 to 2016. They took all those calls, they looked at the addresses, they correlated those with the music venue, and then they looked at all those dates and found out what kind of live music was happening on those dates. Once we looked at all the numbers, the police calls for service, and the resulting charges, broke it down by music genre, we really didn't find any difference at all. We also looked at what is defined as a violent crime versus nonviolent crime. We still didn't see any difference between genres of music. What we did see was far and away a higher number of police calls coming from downtown bars. Whiskey Jack's was the winner in police calls for service in this 8-year period, somewhere around 500 calls. The next runner-up was Segredo's, or Club Liquid as it is now, in the high 200s. And then shortly behind that was a bar called Our Place on Park, which we won't get into that tonight, but it is a prime example of the struggles that Black business owners have to face with higher levels of scrutiny and issues that come as a result of that. We stayed together working with Randy to do a study on media bias and also community organizing, and this work really helped us get set up to start a task force. There we go. So it was really 7 years in the making for us to be able to have a task force on equity in music and entertainment. We started in 2012 where we started to see an escalation in greater police response, venues starting to refuse to book hip hop. And we kind of go through these 2 to 4 year cycles where hip hop is doing great, then it kind of shuts down, rebuilds, and so on. And so we started first meeting with the police department about over policing we were seeing. We also contacted the mayor's office, worked with the deputy mayor of public safety, had conversations. At the same time, Karen Wolf with the city was working on the city's cultural plan. And she was convening groups of artists of all different genres, and not just music, but to find out what people wanted to see from a cultural aspect in the city. And she pulled together the hip hop group. I managed to be a part of that. Rob was a part of that also. And we spent 90 minutes talking about public safety. We didn't one time get to talking about actual arts and culture when it came to hip hop. And that was eye-opening for Karen. And so then she kind of came on board to help us. We then spent several years meeting with a variety of people, Madison Police Department, the Deputy Mayor of Public Safety, Madison Arts Commission, Alcohol License and Review Commission, and then Civil Rights jumped on board as well, talking about what we could do to solve this community issue. And 7 years later, we finally got this task force. And it was received in an interesting way. So our dearly beloved Phil Hands drew this cartoon. I'm Soggy P because Soglin was there at the time. And I'm here to say I want to promote hip hop in a safe and responsible way. And that might be funny on the surface, but if you look at all the imagery here and just making fun of the idea without understanding the underlying reason for it, it's kind of what we were up against. The goals of the task force was really to talk about how do we share this responsibility in the community to make sure that everyone has access to our music scene. And then also, how do we get representation of artists of color, and specifically Black artists, on Madison stages? The task force was composed of 11 people. I was the chair, Rob was the vice chair. We included a couple musicians, a promoter, Matt Girding from the Majestic, Darwin Sampson from the Frequency, may it rest in peace. The Frequency, not Darwin, he's alive and well. And then also a number of city committees, which you can see here, ALRC, Transit and Parking, Arts Commission, Equal Opportunities, and Public Safety Review. And we met for about a year, mostly monthly, to come up with recommendations. And so we were tasked with 4 different things to figure out. One was identify root causes, explore best practices. So what's causing, what led to this equity issue in the first place? We needed to identify that. And, you know, my background is in science. And so for me to solve a problem, I have to know what caused it. I have to know how the system works, or I can't find a viable solution. And you probably can't either. So it helps all of us. And looking at best practices, we're not the only place on earth this is happening. What other cities in the United States have experienced this? And what have they done to try to remedy? We were next tasked with coming up with short and long-term and short-term strategies. So we kind of broke this down by 1 year, 5 year, and 10-year goals for the recommendations that we came up with. And then finally, we were tasked with providing an analysis of costs, revenues, and timelines. We didn't quite get to number 4. This task force was provided a city staff member, Martha White, who's in the Civil Rights Office, who did a phenomenal job, but she wasn't actually given hours during her workday, really, to put time and effort in on this. To compare that with other committees, the Ad Hoc Police Policy and Procedure, or even the Oscar Mayer Planning Committee, multiple city staff people were assigned to this. They had a budget so they could make a website. They got, you know, money to do big studies to figure out what their recommendations should say. And we couldn't get a website, and we had to buy our own pizza one night. So joking about that, but very different priorities here. So we came up with 31 recommendations. And I want to say first that in the group of people that we had at the table who came from many different walks of lives and experiences, I was surprised that we came to an agreement on the root cause of this issue so quickly. I mean, it was really in basically one meeting. Everyone came to agree very quickly that the root cause of lack of equity in our music scene is racism. We have a lot of unconscious bias. We have conscious bias, microaggressions, and the myths and stigmas associated with hip hop, which has often been used as code for Black people in Madison to kind of hide what we're really trying to say. And so that led us to come up with recommendations in about 5 different categories. The first category that we looked at was community and culture. One of the biggest recommendations that we had, the very first one, was to ask the city for a full-time staff person so that we could have someone who acts as a liaison from the city, and they would primarily work in the community to help do things like make sure these recommendations get processed, and then work with people. So if I want to book a concert in the park, how do I fill out the permits? How do I get permission to do that? Do I even know that I need to get a permit to do that? If I want to own a business, let's say I want to start my own bar, do I know how to do that? And one area where racism really comes into play subtly here is that most of us, when we find opportunities, are finding it based on our networks. So we do our due diligence, we study hard, we work really hard, but when it comes down to getting that job or getting that how do I do this question answered, we lean on the people that we know who might also know people that can help us out. And so just by the nature of the way our country is formed, we have a lot of segregation. We have a lot of segregation in Madison, not just in proximity to one another, but in access to opportunity as well. And so just by this nature of networking, we managed to keep people from accessing opportunity. So the city position was designed to help to remedy some of that. We also talked about the fact that we don't have a chance to educate the general public about the culture of hip hop. Hip hop is really a culture. Rap is the music, hip hop is the culture. It's a way of life. It's a style. It includes music, it includes electronic music, it includes dance, visual arts, and so many different things. And we thought that providing that education could help us to bust some of the myths and stigma around this. We also talked here about how might this look in community centers to bring more access and funding for hip hop programming in community centers. We had a big section on media and police. These weren't necessarily directly tied to the entertainment scene. We pulled recommendations that were already existing in different reports. These are issues that we've known for decades in Madison, recognizing over-policing of events that have large crowds of Black and brown people. We arrest 11 times more Black people in Madison than we do white people. You can look up the disparities yourself. So we recommend things that actually parallel for media police, like coming up with a standard language. How do we talk about this? What kind of language do we use when we're talking about hip hop music? A lot of the news stories we've had coverage over the years will open the story. There was a couple on TV as well with like police tape, flashing lights, or Madison hip hop has had a terrible time, plagued with violence. And so you're starting the story to shape with this myth. And we really want to change that narrative. Recommendations for both media and police to address bias, more bias training, anti-bias training, and beyond just like I'm gonna check the box so I know what microaggressions are, but really getting into that role play. We recommended that the city either use their Racial Equity and Social Justice Initiative department to provide this training, or if they were too busy, we have several very good organizations in the Madison area who are experts in this area and who could provide this training. So the city should contract with them. One of them, of course, I have to give the plug to Nehemiah, which is my day job, and we do this training and consulting. Next, we looked at venues. So what could we do to make sure that there's equal access? One of the more controversial points in talking about venues was around the alcohol license and whether or not we could and we do this training and consulting. I'm echoing on somebody's thing. And then whether or not we could make any requirements tied to the liquor license related to equity. Now, one thing to consider is that if I get money from the city, if I contract with the city, I'm required to submit an affirmative action plan. If I have more than 14 employees, I have to work with the Civil Rights Department to at least have a plan written up to say how I'm going to increase my hires in racial equity and gender equity. And you know, this isn't necessarily enforced, but at least it's a focus put on this. Is the alcohol license a contract with the city that could then be, same terms to be applied? We recommended in this case that we look at that. We also recommended that the Alcohol License and Review Commission implement a training program for bars in order to keep their liquor license. We already do bartender safety training. Now, this isn't required to keep a liquor license, but we're told that it's highly recommended. And if a person ends up having some trouble at their venue, if they've taken the training, the consequences might not be as harsh because we know that the person is making a good effort. So what could we tie to this? And the reason for this is not just because of the access issues, but because of the issues with microaggressions and community relationships that occur when hip hop shows are happening. I don't think a lot of people know that most bars and venues do their own booking. So they have a person on staff whose job it is to look around at the local talent and bring people into their venues and book up their calendar. We don't currently have anyone who's looking at hip hop artists in our bars and venues. So if a hip hop artist wants to do a show, they have to go to that venue and ask them to give them a date. And that hip hop artist will book artists for that schedule, effectively making them a promoter. And so what happens is we have these venues that are usually full of majority white crowds that are suddenly filled with majority Black and brown crowds. And that comes with all of the unconscious bias, all of the fear of hip hop, all of the stigmas, which can result in bad relationships or interactions between bouncers and patrons, bartenders and patrons. And if we're starting out with tension, it just doesn't bode very well for anyone having a good night. So we really want to explore that very strongly. Transportation was another big area because, as some people may know, the buses stop running at 11 o'clock at night. Bar time is 2 o'clock. So if you're dependent on public transportation and you want to go out, most of things are happening downtown, how do you get back home? We did draw from, there's a big transportation study that was done a few years ago. Most of those recommendations still have not been implemented. So we tried to pull from that report to recommend things like night transit. Could there be some kind of shuttle that operates, or free cab rides that operate for the specific purpose of allowing access to downtown for these reasons? And then, of course, finally, access. How does anyone get access to any of these processes? This is another place where that full-time position would come into play, working in the community, and then also helping the city understand how we can make changes in a way that's culturally responsive and in a way that's meaningful and will make a difference. You can read the report. I believe it's linked in the chat. If not, we'll get that up. And you can look at the recommendations, and we are always more than happy to talk about these. The report was accepted by the Madison Common Council. There's two options. There's accept and there's adopt. An adopted report means that the Common Council says that they are going to implement recommendations. Doesn't mean they actually will, but it means they're taking on some sort of legislative responsibility to do these things. Primarily because we did not have the cost analysis, and of course there was big pushback to the police recommendations, our report was accepted at the time, which basically means they're saying, you wrote a report. It's not good you wrote a report, not bad, just you wrote a report, acknowledging that it was done. And so now we're working on going forward, how do we work with the city to get individual recommendations implemented? So I just want to give another framing. In Madison, the current narrative, hip hop is code for Black. Hip hop is a public safety threat, and hip hop adds no value for the local arts community. And we want to change that. We want to show that hip hop is arts and culture. Hip hop is a benefit and a unifier, and hip hop adds immense value to the local arts community. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Rob to tell you a little bit more about our next steps.
All right, so there are basically 4 things that we wanted to get across to really help change that narrative. The first thing we want to look at is equity. You know, we really want to make sure that there's access for everyone, and not just from, you know, a performance standpoint, but even in venues, you know, like for people to have somewhere to go, you know. So that would be the main thing, making sure that access is possible. The next thing we wanted to look at was economic impact. How the impact of music can impact the city. And when we say that, you know, entrepreneurial efforts for folks to be able to really see, and it would not only help the artists, but actually it would help to build money and put money into the city. So to really make the city grow in a truly progressive way that we are talking about. So the third point we want to talk about was partnership. And it's really important to have that element, is because we can tie into venues and organizations and really, you know, really build a structure through these partnerships that you know, will make Madison an attractive place, not only for the African American experience here, but even for people that are on the verge of moving here for work, to be able to see culture here, you know, and that's going to take that interaction and those partnerships to make that possible. And then the last thing will be the implementation. What are the action steps? How are we going to make this really work? So that's pretty much the 4 points that we have, and really, we want to really make sure and ensure that this is really part of the growth of Madison. So those are those 4 points, and we will go from there.
Thanks. And we really need, in order to make this happen, we really need broad community support for these recommendations. For us to be able to convince the Common Council to implement some of these things, we're going to need our people behind us. We need our neighbors behind us, not just the people who participate in the hip hop community. And when we improve the hip hop community, honestly, a lot of the recommendations that we make are going to be things that improve our overall, not just our music scene, but also our local economy. And so our first step in this plan is to align stakeholders. And this is kind of an example of one of the steps to take for that, is just to get people aware of what's happening. So we have artists, promoters, venues, educators, music production companies, and audiences. And if any of you are out there and would like to get a group together to talk more about this, I'm going to share a link with you at the end that will allow you to do that. Or of course, you can throw up your information in the chat or in the Facebook thread. Second, we need to really strategize for equity. So taking the recommendations, identifying barriers to why those recommendations will be difficult to implement, and then coming up with solid plans. And the key here really is keeping the focus on equity for Black artists in Madison. A lot of times in our area, in many areas, projects like this start out with a very diverse table, right? They start out with an idea that comes from communities of color. When they move into spaces with people who have the power and the privilege and the resources to make that idea happen, oftentimes that idea will get co-opted by white community members. The voices of community of color get pushed to the background, and there's a result, but it's not really focused on equity, and the solutions aren't necessarily designed in a way that's beneficial. So in essence, we wasted our time and money. We don't want to do that here. We're going to move at a pace that allows us to keep this front and center. And then finally, we want a 5-year plan to get this done. How are we going to get our ducks in a row in the next year or two and really get some things going? This is important for a lot of reasons. We talked a lot about this. I'm not going to bore you guys with the rest of this because I think you know, how do we get together under a strategic vision? And so now here are some of the nuts and bolts. One of the recommendations in the report was to work with an outside expert who can help us come up with these implementation plans. And not only that, but help us to make policy recommendations and legislative recommendations so that Madison can be a true music city, great for all artists. And so we met up with a company called Sound Diplomacy, and they've worked with cities all over the world on doing just that, making music cities. There was a really great study in Vancouver that they did where they focused on equity, and they came up with a night mayor. So there's a mayor that's just focused on the nightlife, a person who is there from the city with authority who can help manage those relationships. Now we've received, some pushback about bringing in outsiders, and that's totally understandable. But in this case, this is something that we've been working on for over a decade now, and that's just, me and colleagues, not the people who have come before us and also affected by these issues. And we've worked very hard, and we've made a little bit of movement. It's time for us to really buckle down and use our resources so that we can move this a lot faster. And by the way, UCAN is a completely volunteer-run organization. We get paid sometimes stipends, but that's really what we're working. This is really grassroots. So bringing in sound diplomacy to help with this, keeping the focus on equity, and we estimate that the cost of this whole project is going to be about $300,000. That means $150,000 to really get the plans up and running, and another $150,000 to do the implementation. Now, this money isn't just going to sound diplomacy. Sound diplomacy is working with us to come up with a plan so that some money goes into the community, like about half of the money is going into the community to pay people to work on this project full time to help see these things through so it stays rooted in the community. And then sound diplomacy will get paid to do some of their expertise and also to expand capacity because, we're all busy people around here. We just need more help. So we will be looking for help with that. So that's our general overview. And at this time, I'd like to open it up for some questions and discussion.
If somebody's seen questions that I don't, please interject because I'm not seeing them on my thread over here. I apologize again. But thanks, Karen and Rob. I think that, again, every time I hear you talk about the report and the work, I'm just astounded at the time that you've put in as volunteers to move things forward in Madison, Wisconsin. Can you talk a little bit about how you're envisioning moving forward under quarantine? Like what is work that can move a little bit quicker now because there's a bit more think tank time available, like possibly committees meeting or work groups like you were talking about, just ways to really bring the plan into the local community and have people process it with you and others?
Yeah, thanks for that question. In a sense, we can kind of look at this like we have time now, right? Our music scene has slowed down. Well, it's not happening right now. It's hard for everyone. We're all really struggling with this. But given that, what can we work on? How can we make sure that when things get up and running again, that we've solved some of these problems, that there is more access, that we've been able to take the time with venue owners and with other stakeholders to make sure that they understand the issues here, that we've been able to educate about the community. So I'm really hoping that we'll be able, like in the next few weeks, really, we're looking to pull together larger groups of people and people who want to help us work on these plans. And we really need a broad variety of people to make sure that we don't want to come up with plans that aren't working for everyone. We need a broad variety of voices to make sure that the plans we come up with are effective. What do you think, Rob?
One of the things I was going to say was, and the thing about it is with the COVID, it's a blank slate right now, and there's opportunity if people are earnest and honest, we can really shape things the way that they are supposed to be, so it's going to take those collaborations and that partnering to kind of go forward to push for a dream scene. Like what are we really trying to get at? So, like I said, I think now what better time than right now? People got time on their hands. People can really think about what are the important issues and how do we really make this scene grow. So I think it's wide open.
In a sense, people have asked me how COVID has affected hip hop artists. And a lot of times I say, not very much, because there was already a big struggle to have access. So, venues are closing down, unfortunately. So that's the reality. So, now people are getting some of that experience, to what artists with no access were feeling. Scott, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I had another question. one thing that I think is a really big problem, both specific to the issues we're talking about with hip hop and with the lack of representation for Black artists, as well as for just the arts and music in Madison in general, is that I don't think city leaders really see artists, especially like, scrappier independent artists and musicians and their supporters, as a political constituency that they really have to answer to or take seriously. When it comes to the arts, certainly there's city arts funding, and there's leaders who kind of will pay lip service to the arts and who will, maybe take seriously a few bigger arts nonprofits and, some of the bigger philanthropists, but really the kind of greater, mass of people who really make up the art scene here and really keep things interesting don't seem to have that much of a voice in local politics. How do you think we can fix that? And what opportunities do you see in this report and in kind of this ongoing effort to get people to actually act on it in a material way?
Rob, do you want to take that as a former political candidate?
Oh, the pressure. One of the biggest things with the social unrest that we're dealing with right now is that it is really a time to be held more accountable and more responsible right now. And I think that it starts at a grassroots level. And hip hop is a microcosm, as I said earlier, it's a microcosm of the society in general. So even when you talk about taking more steps towards being more politically minded, hip hop has been doing a lot of that grunt work. It's just starting to unfold and develop. So I think that the work will continue. And I think the biggest key to that is going to be the people in positions of power to really listen to people that are on the grassroots level. I think that there's not been that true interaction. It's like, yeah, that lip service sounds fine, but how are we really taking the steps to really make stuff work? So it goes on both sides. I feel like our communities can do more work and be held more accountable. And in turn, we need to hold politics and politicians more accountable and the people. So I think that is it's a necessary conversation to be having right now. And I think that if politicians and people in power are honest about really making Madison truly progressive, then you will start to really want to listen to more of these conversations and more of the situations that people are going through, and really try to find some answers.
Yeah, and if I can follow up on that really quick, and I'm sure you'll have an interesting perspective on this, Rob, as someone who technically works for the city through your role in the library and the media lab. I think another related issue is that the public arts funding that we have through the city and the county, they fund some good work through different organizations and individual artists, but I feel like the vast majority of artists, and especially musicians in Madison, either don't know about those opportunities, or they don't think that it's for them, or the process of just applying for a conventional grant is so cumbersome and intimidating that that it really disadvantages a lot of people. And there was an interesting dynamic when Dane Arts did its Dane Arts Need Grants, which was this ultra simple thing, and all of a sudden you saw people come out of the woodwork who mostly had never applied for a grant like that before, and it was really eye-opening to see that dynamic. I mean, what can we do to get more people interested in that and to have a stake in that process, if that process is something that we want to actually feed into?
Well, one of the things I think is important is what we're talking about as far as partnering, really finding, if people don't know how to write grants, how is there not a partnership to really provide that access for people to learn about that kind of stuff? So I think that's something that's very necessary. I think a lot of people are intimidated because they don't feel like they really have that shot, but the more confidence you get with partnering and interacting with these people where you can learn this information, then you can see more people starting to thrive and be able to get that kind of stuff, get those balls rolling. So I hope I'm saying that in a proper way that everybody gets. But yeah, I think partnering and learning is the only way that we're going to grow. So I think that is a very important thing. is to be able to have those partnerships where the people can learn and take the chances and be able to get those opportunities. So.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean,
And I
that's
know
one of the
people-
things that those that position could
Yeah.
do. That full-time position is be in the community to help people know what opportunities are out there. And you know, both the city for sure, I'm trying to think if the county does, offers workshops right before their grants, and if you call, they're really nice and they'll help you. But it's about knowing those things exist in the first place, and that's where we get back to networks and how things get separate. And even though they do those trainings, if you don't trust, you know, that opportunities are going to be legit or that you have a fair shot at them, you're not as likely to take advantage of those opportunities. Also, just to note that we only have one staff person in our entire city working on arts, and that's all arts. And she's in the planning department. We need an arts department. We need a cultural affairs department in our city.
Yep. We do have Satya on tape from a debate during her campaign saying that Karen should have staff. So
Yeah,
I guess it's not going to happen this
that.
budget year because everything's on fire. But yeah, people should hold her to that.
Can you talk about the role that the Common Council plays in moving this forward and how their response to, well, you say that they accepted the report, but they're not adopting the report. And when does that begin to shift? Does there need to be another ask? Does something, what else needs to go to the Common Council for acceptance as opposed to adopting the report?
So essentially, we'd have to make another proposal. And what that requires is getting an alderperson on board to write a resolution. So let's say we want to move forward with the training requirement for the liquor license. We would have to get an alder to make a proposal at the ALRC meeting that we pursue that. And so essentially what we're going to need to do is break out some of these recommendations, come up with plans, and then reintroduce them to the Common Council. And so we do have some supporters. Arvina Martin was on the task force. Shiva Bidar has been supportive. Marsha Rummel actually made an on-the-floor amendment at the council meeting when our report was accepted that the city should follow up with us to help us get it implemented. You know, slow progress, but some progress with that. But really to get the attention of the Common Council, we need their constituents to be making noise about it. So that's where it really comes down to getting broad support.
Can you, you know, so people listening and hearing this, what would you say an action step that they could take would be? Like contact your alder and say what exactly? Give us a script, Karen.
Oh boy. I mean, you can contact your alder and say, I want to see equity in my music scene. What's happening with that task force report?
Okay.
And ask your alder for an update. And when they say they don't know, tell them you want to know, and they should get back to you and follow up. That's a great place to start. The other thing to do is to, if you have time, if you have resources, maybe you only have time to help once a month, but you know, we appreciate anybody that can get on board. And then aside from that, the easiest is to tell your friends, families, and coworkers what's going on to spread the word.
Can I add one thing to that? More people should be making time to sit through boring local government meetings, Common Council, and you know, there's lots of various like committees and commissions that have input on all these things as well. And you know, when, like, for example, the recent, you know, resolutions that came up about police funding and curfews, when people were showing up in those Common Council Zoom meetings that alders were not necessarily used to hearing from in a big way, that I think made a real difference. And it made people go like, you know, you have to respond to us. We're here and you answer to us.
And it's so much easier right now. If there are people watching who haven't done it yet, you know, you got to figure out how to get on the email list or get the notification. You can go to the city or county website. But once you do that, you can register to speak online. You can go through, you know, click their link. You can phone in to give your public comment. So it's easier than it used to be, having to go down to the city council county building and go through a cumbersome process. So yeah, definitely start watching some of these things.
But, and lastly on this, so there are two priorities that I'm hearing. One would be, on the position that's being recommended in the report. So that's one, is the position seems like a priority. And then sound diplomacy. And then factoring that in as just a gateway to moving a fair amount of implementation forward. And I know it's a really interesting exercise for us as a city to look at hiring somebody outside and why. And I learned a lot asking you and Rob why you felt that was important. And I think what my takeaway was that you felt like whatever's going to get it done, let's just get this done. So can you speak to those two? There's sound diplomacy and there's $300K attached to that ask to bring an outside agency in. Not all of that money would go to sound diplomacy. Some of that is going into the community. And then as the priority ask for alders is to, where do you stand on hiring a position that's going to help implement the task force recommendations?
You want to start, Rob? Well, I'll just say, so sorry, what was the question?
Sorry,
again?
I was long-winded, but two priorities that I'm hearing. One is this position being created. Second is the role of sound diplomacy and raising the resources to bring a group like that in.
Yeah, so, and we're not trying to just get the city to give us this money. This really needs to be a public and private and government partnership for it to be truly effective. We need businesses to have skin in the game here. We need venues to have skin in the game. And often the best way to do that is financial investment, knowing that this is an investment that's going to pay off for our music scene and those of us who work in the scene in the long run. And we're going to stay stagnant if we don't do these things. So yeah, just making it clear that we're not just asking the city for this money. We do want it to come from a broad variety of places.
It goes back to that.
No, I said any follow-up from you, Rob.
Oh no, I was gonna say, but that's I'm just kind of piggybacking on what Karen was saying. Like that's important when I talk about that partnership, and I'm talking about like the interaction that it's gonna take, because we're not talking about just a couple artists. We talking about a whole scene and a whole community, and really it's gonna take investment from everybody to make that progressive kind of idea that we really want to see. So I think that would be one of the biggest things is to really hold people, when I talk about hold people accountable and responsible, and really like, if you really want to see a better Madison, then step to the plate. So that's what it's going to take. No rap intended.
Can't help yourself. But it really does come back to that music ecosystem that I showed at the beginning. And by the way, that's a sound diplomacy infographic. This is about economic recovery. What's going to happen when things open up again? Bars are going to hire musicians to play. And that's going to bring in more and more people to patronize those businesses. And that's just one simple example of how this is economic development. This isn't just arts and culture, which that by itself should be enough, but we know oftentimes doesn't get that kind of respect. We got to think about this as economic development and support of our systems in our city so that everyone can make a living.
Can you talk about how all that we're discussing this evening folds into the Black Lives Matter movement, Rob?
I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, black musicians matter, Black lives matter, Black art matters. I mean, I think that when you talk about things like access and things like, economic development, all the things that we're talking about, when I said earlier about that microcosm of arts and society in general, that pretty much answers the question that you're asking. Like, so it is important to have these issues be addressed, because we do matter. when you have artists that have stories that people can understand, maybe it's an artist from the South Side that tells a story that deserves to be heard. So it does matter. So I think all of this plays a part into it. It's just a small part from the arts and music side of it, but it plays in the bigger picture, trying to make things better. Is to be inclusive and to really consider different voices, specifically Black voices.
And what happened when there was chaos on State Street? Artists were called.
Yeah.
And in spite of the constant commentary that we get, there just aren't enough Black artists. There were 100 artists, non-white artists, 100 that came to State Street, which then brought other people of color to State Street that felt like they should be there. I mean,
yeah. I'll tell you one thing that for me, it was very heartwarming. It's like, I live on State Street, man. To see the conversations that people were having looking at art, you know, to really be able to, I guess, empathize or understand through a piece of art, that says a lot. It's the same way with music. Like to be able to hear, like I said, different perspectives can only help what we're trying to get to. And that's a better Madison. Whoa, screen blank. Okay.
So we have a question from in the chat here. What steps are you taking to collaborate with after-school hip-hop clubs and nonprofit out-of-school time programs? And how do community centers and after-school clubs fit into your 5-year plan? Rob, do you want to start on that one?
I mean, we've partnered with a number of organizations. I mean, like, obviously through the work that we've been able to do here at the library and partner, it goes back to what I'm talking about as far as partnering. So we've been able to go to different community centers and work and try to get across the curriculum that we do with our media academy. Let me see the second part of the question so I'll make sure I'm answering everything. Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Oh, just how do community centers and after-school clubs fit into our 5-year plan?
Well, I think the more that we get a chance to do more work within, I guess, within the school context, community centers is the same way. I think over the next 5 years, it will be important as we continue to unfold the type of program that we do. It starts off with music, obviously, but we go into things like entrepreneurialism and things like that. So specifically over the next 5 years, how does it unfold? It does unfold. I guess I would need to be able to talk about it a little bit more in depth. I hope I'm answering this the right way. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think there is a plan over the next 5 years to be more involved in community centers. We have been, obviously we've been involved with, we've done a partnership with Goodman. We've done a number of different organizations, different community centers. So I think that work will continue.
And then how do we also, that's another place where we get hit with the myths and the stigma. So I can't tell you how many, I'm always reaching out to people doing events to say, hey, you should have some hip hop on here, and trying to see where we can get hip hop artists opportunities to perform. And I kid you not, almost every time, if it's like a festival or like a neighborhood block party, and I say, I have some hip hop artists that would be great for this. And they say to me, oh, well, this is a family event. This is, there's going to be kids here and that's not appropriate. Well, what's music? So it's this preconceived notion that hip hop means, vulgar, violent misogyny. And just like any music genre, sure, there's some of that in there, but there's so much more in the music, there's dance and, so many things. So part of that, in answer to the questions, how do community centers fit in, is coming into these conversations and really making an effort, not just us trying to teach, but people making an effort to learn and understand what this issue is.
I think that's also, moving in like a systemic inclusion as opposed to systemic exclusion. It's really a way to begin to, transition out of hip hop being such a compartmentalized genre in the city, and just really seeing how many people are behind incorporating hip hop culture, rap music, everything that falls under hip hop into early education, the roles that it can play in the economic development of the city. I think that there is, Madison's music community is an underrepresented political body internally. Like, we don't realize the strength of our political will and power with respect to how we can use our voice. And I think conversations like this, and Black Lives Matter is making a lot of this more easy for us to and challenge and feel uncomfortable about, because we've got to make it happen. I mean, it's our, it's our scene, but the local business is their scene too. I mean, they're going to thrive if the scene is thriving. It's just all connected. That was the comment.
And to add to that, I mean, one thing that the task force report does really well is show you all the connections between the arts and all of these other policy areas, from transit to housing to over policing, especially over policing, to the very stark kind of segregated racial geography and economic geography that we have here. And it illustrates how all these things tie together and how you have to grapple with it on that level of complexity and build, and it's also a great opportunity to build connections around different issues when you're not just treating the arts as like kind of a decoration or like a fucking garnish on top of our beautiful city. Like, no, it's this complex, hairy thing that's deeply threaded in with everything.
Sybil, did you have a comment?
Well, I put it in there.
I didn't know if you wanted to say it.
I put it. Oh, okay. Oh, either way, I mean, that's fine.
Wait, Sybil, can you just quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. Music director at WRT. I've been there 25 years now, and hip hop's always been a part of the programming that we have there. I mean, Universal Soul Explosion goes back before my time. And we have some more music, I know it's on a lot late at night. It's very popular with folks though, and partly it's those when some slots have opened up, and so we filled them with hip hop. We didn't move it there. It's just, it's been there, and I've increased it over the years to different shows. At one point we had a show that was affiliated with the First Wave, the Cypher Zone. The thing with having a show that involves folks like that, it was strength because it had a collective, but you had to have a strong leadership, and otherwise it's not going to, really hold together. Now we've got a show, we've got a time slot that's just like, it's before midnight. It'll be the first Friday of the month for an hour, right, Wendy? But, so that's open actually right now. And,
yeah.
So, we're there's that opportunity if somebody wanted to do something that focused on local music. I'll tell you, more emails, more people dropping off CDs than any other genre by far all the time from local artists. It's always been hip hop, and it's been the hip hop artists that call me that's, to promote themselves, and do it themselves, and, come and hand me those singles, those demos and albums. And I'm not real sure how much they get played. I mean, the way it's going on now. Another thing is, Boss Lady's handling USC and the Friday night Fanjacker radio recordings, because we're doing all the recordings off site right now with no volunteers in the station. Mm-hmm. So we don't really have that kind of internship opportunity. But if somebody, that host can't get back on because he doesn't really have the equipment and he doesn't really have the skills, it's like I try to talk to him about, can we get you back on the air? But he just wants to come back in the station. So maybe somebody could assist the host that you was doing Friday and up until the pandemic, and that's Tilo. If anybody knows Tilo, he's hosting. Yep. He's holding down Fridays. He was holding down Fridays till this happened. So now they're actually getting some great folks in, I think, from Milwaukee a lot on there doing stuff. But, Rebecca knows how to facilitate that. But, I mean, we don't, there's an example of, a Black voice being disenfranchised, but I'm not really the right person to help him. I can't really get what he needs. He really wants, I'm so operated by email with everyone else. It's the only way to handle people like mass emails for a lot of stuff that's going on. And I've talked to him on the phone a bunch of times, I don't, just the few people that can't do it. I've talked to him, but I can't make that happen. And then another thing is our African show, which they do play some hip hop as an African Pan Africa. The hosts that are holding it down right now is Encore, and then there's Jeff, and there's Gloria, and we don't have African hosts in it. The main host, Linda Alhaji, and I'm not sure, maybe at least one of the other guys too, like they're back in Africa with they went to their families, and they're there, and they're not going to get back here anytime soon. So right now we're looking for, some more African hosts for that show. And so that's a couple of opportunities that we have, and they're volunteer opportunities, but there might be some ways that we can, partner with people and make things happen.
Yeah, that's great to know, and really appreciate the opportunities that WART has, maintained over the years. And then just also, you mentioned things like, not just on air, but if people want to help with the governance or help with programming, I mean, small organizations like yours are always in need of bodies and volunteers. And so, I mean, there's so many ways that people can get involved in these things.
Yeah, and I mean, we have committees and task forces where you don't, it's not an endless commitment, or, you don't have to make, you don't have to have all this knowledge to just come in and, do it. You can learn, and you can give the time that you have. I am proud to say, and we have actually we have a great board of directors, we have a great staff, and we have a great programming committee, and it's more diverse, and the people in governance and in the positions are more diverse than they ever have been, really, in a long time. So we feel good a little bit, but good about it. But that's anyway, we have a lot of volunteers, that are not white, not different in so many ways, and we haven't got as much representation and governance as we could use on everything. And so we would like to have that. We're going to be we're getting a lot of stuff done in different ways, because nobody's in the station but the paid staff. But we're going to try to open up to the people that have less opportunity to be able to record off site, and just make us, try to make it safe for just a couple people to come in too. And, so we're giving what we can to try to help people that are not, getting the same level of equity, as you say. And we are just, I feel like we're in good shape to really work on that, because we're making this commitment to diversity during this time to work on it more.
Absolutely.
I have a question. Unless I'm interrupting another question that I can't see. Are there any questions in the thread that should come in now?
I don't think so.
Okay. Is it possible, and I'll put this out to Sybil and Scott and everyone to see if there's a willingness, but like Madison 365 has these 10-minute updates every day. Is it possible to work with local media outlets to possibly do a weekly update on task force progress? And so we can hear from you, Rob and Karen, what is happening, if there's something that should go on an agenda for the Common Council, or if there's a work group meeting happening, you're probably going to know before other people. Even if it's a 5 minutes with the two of you, where you just sort of string out the news according to equity in music in Madison. Is that, Scott and Sybil, something that there would be an opening for? Or, I mean, the Isthmus could possibly, just a platform for you to give the news on what's happening around the report. Does that make sense?
Welcome to our report. The city ain't did shit. Good night.
I'm definitely interested in doing more regular follow-up coverage. As Rob pointed out, sometimes there isn't a lot of movement, and that's frustrating, but yeah, and doing stuff on a weekly basis is is a tough thing right now because like
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I feel like the fabric of time is completely screwed up. But
Space,
but
the Time Lords.
yeah, but there should be more. There should definitely be a commitment among local media people to follow up on this more regularly and to explore more of that connection between artists and local politics. I mean, I'll definitely be keeping an eye out for movement on this, or for when various like city leaders are kind of obstructing it or trying to stuff it in a drawer, as we've already seen. So definitely, yeah, we should definitely find more ways to check in on this on some kind of a regular basis. I think that's an awesome idea.
Well, if we can't do it weekly, but again, there's this monthly thing, and I'm hoping to maybe be able to edit this and give it a broadcast there on a Friday at 11 p.m. So if we set some type of date to check back in and something that we could talk about, see if we've got something to talk about before the first Friday of next month, monthly. I feel like that's doable.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And that's another thing, though, a great volunteer role, as to build out capacity for getting this project done, is to have that person whose job it is to do write-ups. Here's what happened in these 2 weeks. Here's the monthly update. Or, a lot of times it's, you're juggling things. Scott emailed me before, like, was it about this, or it was another event that we had where you emailed me about it. I'm like, oh, of course, Scott beat me to asking about the event I should have told him about. So it's just like getting our capacity up to get the word out about things, because a lot of times when people are busy doing, they forget about the telling, and the telling is equally as important. So
yeah,
we're getting
and it's
close
tough
to
work
the
that takes a lot of. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
The telling is something that takes like a lot of coordination and effort in its own right, and people don't always appreciate that. But yeah, it takes some resources.
Absolutely. And someone who knows how to tell in a coherent manner. I mean, it's definitely a skill set. So, okay, well, we're getting close to the end. So I'll tell you about some next steps here. Let me share my screen again. So there's a few things that you can do if you want to get involved. One of those things, obviously, is we need money to push this forward. If you want to support financially, a couple of the easiest ways, paypal.me/UCAN Madison, or we're on Cash App at UCAN Madison. And so the money that you donate there will go directly into the pot for this process. If you just want to know more, you can email us at ucanmadison.org. That's our website. info@ucanmadison.org is the email address. You can take our survey. I'm going to post a link in the chat here. If you would like to get involved, or if you would just even like to just stay on our mailing list so you can stay updated on things, you can click that link in the chat, and then we'll get that on Facebook in the thread there in a second as well, so that you can let us know that you want to be involved. And then also read the task force report, read the on our website, ucanmadison.org. You can find that task force report. You can also find the music genres and violence report if you want to read that as well. And then finally, I just want to do a couple of thank yous. This project wouldn't have gotten off the ground without the support of Madison Arts Commission and Dane Arts. Also a few individuals in the community, David Boyd with So Sonic and Indie Tune-Up, Walter Jankowski, Better Dash Faster, and then Shane Shapiro of Sound Diplomacy. So we're really grateful to have partners to get things off the ground, including those here. Scott, you've always been a big supporter in terms of getting the word out about what's happening, not just with hip hop, but with our whole music community, and doing a great job of telling the whole story, not just the arts, but how does that, like you said, how does that interact with all of the other sectors and area and life, housing, segregation, professional development, proper pay for musicians, all of those things. So definitely check out Tone Madison. And with that, I'll pass it back to Wendy to close us out.
I can't thank everybody enough. I mean, I feel like more is more at this point. More information, more dialogue, consistently sharing information about that you've done. The 31 recommendations should be on everyone's reading list. We all have time to go through information documents like this. You're available for questions. You and Rob have been just incredibly, you're like mentors, you know, around this, and you're so accessible and just really ready to help people move forward in ways that they're able to connect. So I just want to thank you for agreeing to do this. I think we pulled it off in a sort of 101 task force kind of way, and I'm glad that you're going to be doing more of them. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for putting it together. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks to all of you. Thanks to everyone who came. This has been great.
Thanks. Till next time.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks so much.
All right.